when Gauteng, I was told, was as cloudy and cold as everything. So I was show-offing my son here where I am. I hope it's not disturbing, comrades. No, thank you very much, Nopara, Comrade Soli. Let me also greet our National Treasurer. And I don't know if Comrade Chris has joined us of the other office bearers of the SACP, the members of the Central Committee who have joined us today, and all other comrades of our SACP who have joined us either here directly on this platform or who are watching us on our other platforms that are streaming. I do want to say that sometimes when you're getting older, everything becomes significant, even if it's not. But this one, I'm sure I am not mistaken when I say actually it's a very significant event that we are launching today. Because I was trying to think and reflecting and also talking to Comrade Alex earlier. I don't ever remember us having an institutionalized national party school since our unbanning in 1990. Indeed, we've got many party school type activities, national, we've had some, we've had in the provinces, in our districts and in our branches. We've also had joint schools with mainly the COSATU affiliates, but not a national institutionalized party school, which we are today launching, the Jack Simons party school. And this party school, its main aim, which is correct, is actually to develop our own internal cadre for the SACP. But at the same time, we must always remember that in producing internal SACP cadres, as has always been the case with the SACP, we are also producing cadres for the National Democratic Revolution as a whole and its different sides of struggle. To educate, also to contribute to the political education of our allied formations, as well as key cadres in what now we've resolved we want to build as a left popular front. So always training party cadres has simultaneously also been training cadres for the movement. And I don't think we should see the Jack Simons party school as different from that, but at the same time without losing its primary focus, which is training SACP cadres. So I just thought that it's important, that I say that. But also, I think it's important that on this significant occasion and historic occasion, which I feel privileged, by the way, as General Secretary of the SACP, to have been asked to actually launch this, is that we also maybe need to start by reminding ourselves about the role of the SACP historically in political education, and also just say a few more words about who Jack Simons was. Now, right from the word go in our formation in 1921, we're going to be 99 years this year, political education has always been a crucial and a key component of the SACP. Of course, in the early days, we used to send cadres to the Soviet Union. A number of them went, by the way, amongst those were our early leaders, like Moses Kotane and many others. But one would argue that much as the party had been conducting political education as part of its life, there seems to have been more of an increase after Kotane took over in 1939. Especially in the 1940s, because that's the period that seems to have been where the famous and legendary SACP night schools became institutionalized. Now, this coincided with a number of developments. The one development was that the party had just overcome one of its worst factionalized periods in its history, the 1930s. And after Kotane took over in 1939, and the party was then refocusing on reuniting itself, one of the key decisions that it took was that it's going to be important that its African leaders and cadres join the African National Congress. It was no longer necessary just to work with the ANC as an ally, as two distinct organizations, but also it was important that communists must go and join. It was Africans those days, go and join the ANC in their own right, as one way of taking forward our 1929 Native Republic Thesis resolution of contributing towards building a revolutionary liberation movement. For instance, one person who used never to stop talking about the legendary night schools was Comrade Harry Gwala, who was recruited into the party in 1942 and sent to one of the night schools for a month in Johannesburg. That made like a permanent change, actually, in his life. He always referred back and went back to that. That's just part of my little knowledge about those night schools, at the time. And also, the party decided to intensify political education at that time because also of the fledgling progressive trade union movement, of which the party was a central component, was the key driver, actually, in building like something that later became known as the Council for Non-European Trade Unions, which like one of the precursors to a COSATU today. So also the party then never stopped even after it was banned in terms of conducting political education in the underground. In fact, as we start the Jack Simons Party School, with a number of comrades I know who share my own passion for research, it would be very good that we also just compile the history of the SACP in political education in this country. I think it's something that is very important that we do. Of course, after the banning in the 1960s, the SACP, in a way, somehow re-dynamized this relationship with the Soviet Union, partly also now to assist the movement to get arms, but also then began to send comrades for political education and even formal education from exile to the Soviet Union and the Eastern Bloc socialist countries from the 1960s. And in fact, even the main source for political education in the ANC was actually through these efforts and networks created by the SACP at the time. It's interesting, by the way, that Comrade Jack Simons joined the Communist Party. Now, I'm not so sure, some comrades may know better in looking at his short biography, whether this was because he joined it in London, whether this was the Communist Party of Great Britain then, or was it also at the same time the SACP? Because he returned around the same time as 1939 and so on, and was part of the efforts, by the way, to reunite the party from its factionalism. So from very early days, he was part of rebuilding a party that had been divided very badly in the 1930s, together with Kotane and many other comrades. In fact, they attribute that he was amongst those who pushed for readmission into the party of Comrade Bill Andrews, amongst other comrades who had been chased out of the party at that time. Now, I can't really agree more in our naming of this party school as the Jack Simons Party School. I don't think there is any of the leaders of our party historically who actually played such a crucial role as a political educator, not just for the SACP, but for the movement. Comrade Jack Simons was also an academic. He, by the way, returned to South Africa in 1937 when he was in the UK and joined the party then. I assume that's the SACP. Was an academic at the University of Cape Town. He also taught a number of comrades, introduced them to Marxism at the University of Cape Town, Comrade Sheila. Amongst those was actually Comrade Raymond Satner, amongst the comrades who were taught by Comrade Jack Simons. He represents what we need at this point in time. We need a lot more communist academics who are playing a role both in the sphere of academia as well as in broader political education in organization. He had a PhD from the London School of Economics. And by the way, did a lot of anthropological work in the 1930s into the 40s in Gwalanga Township, which actually gave him insight because one of his interests was methods of penalizing, wrongdoers, criminals, and so on, which was something that sensitized him to the injustices of colonialism and all that. Comrade Jack went into exile, I think it was 1966, together then with his partner, Ray Alexander. And they spent 24 years in exile in Lusaka, and they made a significant contribution. He was teaching at the University of Zambia, both anthropology and sociology, and also then later got drawn into the work of the movement, the ANC, and his legendary, well-known lectures in the camps in Angola in the 1970s, and produced quite a number of comrades, by the way. I know Comrade Mzala was one of the beneficiaries of those. And if I'm not mistaken, Comrade Joel, other comrades may know who else. But I was also thinking, by the way, that as part of the literature and branding of the Jack Simons political school, it may be important just to produce a book, even if electronically, of reflections of comrades who were taught by Jack Simons, who are still around in the movement. Just to interview them, ask them to write 2 pages or so about their experiences as part of also compiling our own history and part of branding the school. Well, Comrade Jack is well known for the fact that much as he was a loyal party cadre, but he was not uncritical sometimes of some of the things that were happening in the party and in the movement. One of the things we are told that he was worried about, amongst other things, was Imbogotho, for instance, and its role in MK and in judging comrades and in all those things. But he said he was being critical inside the organization and was a party cadre. So the long and short of what I'm saying is that there is no more an appropriate person that we name the school after other than Comrade Jack. Now, when we are starting this initiative, as we have always done as the party, is that our education must always move with the times. I'll come back to that even when I talk a bit about the necessity to study the classics. But nevertheless, that we need to locate our political education challenges in the period we are in at all times. Party has been very good in that. It's even more so, for instance, if we are to anchor ourselves around our own resolution from the 14th National Congress in terms of the challenges of the period, that In order for the SACP to deal with the challenges of the period, it must be characterized by strategic consistency, analytical awareness, and tactical flexibility. This, of course, what we are starting here is a very key component, not the totality of promoting analytical awareness, but it's a key component. Political education plays a very crucial role in that. And we are launching this political school in the midst of what we have characterized as the immediate triple challenges, distinct from triple structural challenges, although deeply interlinked, of poverty, inequality, and unemployment. But our triple immediate challenges now is COVID-19, is dealing with the economic crisis that we are facing, as well as the crisis of social reproduction. And the three things are deeply interlinked. In fact, one of the newer pillars of the South African road to socialism, which I will talk about just now, was dealing with the environment. And this pillar has never been this relevant as of now, given the reality of COVID-19, which is immediately traceable to the capitalist destruction of the environment and what sometimes has been known as a serious possibility of an ecological rupture caused by the greedy accumulation of global capitalism at this point in time. So it's going to be very important that right away we use this party school, for instance, to engage with COVID-19, the political economy of COVID-19, as we discussed in the last Central Committee that we have, that COVID-19, we must understand its political economy as communists. And Comrade Jack was very good at that. And that's what our party school is supposed to do. The political economy of COVID-19 is that it's a disease, a pandemic generated by capitalist greed. And in fact, indications point to the fact that we are still going to have more pandemics at the rate at which we are proceeding with the destruction of our environment. And also to understand COVID-19 as both a health, but also an economic and social problem. It's very important to understand the political economy of COVID-19 from that standpoint. That on the economic side, it has further exposed the inadequacies and failure of capitalism to deal with or to address basic human rights like provision of health and actually assisting in preventing the spread of the current virus. But also COVID-19 has further exposed the depth of the crisis of social reproduction in our families, in our households, in our communities, and in broader society. So it's very important then that in dealing with COVID-19, we also understand it that, as I have said before, some comrades have said, it doesn't only go through the biological veins, but it also goes through the class, gender, and national veins of our society. So it's very important then that this is a grand opportunity for us to just start the very early serious political classes or discussions focusing on COVID-19. But I would like to move then to something that I've actually been feeling very strongly about. Now, if you then ask me and you give me an opportunity to open this, of course, you're also expecting that I will have my own little biases. My bias has always been on political education that what we have not been adequately doing is actually the study and discussion of our program, the South African Road to Socialism. And I think, in terms of my own assessment, that this has created a huge gap in the Communist Party. In fact, even sometimes some of what we regard as tendencies that seem to be foreign to the SACP, they've got to do a lot with the fact that we have not mainstreamed SARS ideologically and organizationally into the heart of the SACP. That's what I would like to talk about for the rest of this input that I'm giving. The importance of SARS. For me, the Jack Simons Political School must make sure that our cadres are taken through and be able to discuss South African road to socialism. Now, we must study SARS not as a Bible, but as a guide to action. But also SARS, it's a very detailed Marxist-Leninist analysis of South African society and its challenges. And for that reason, it's a very good program. So it needs to be used for both theoretical and practical grounding of our cadres, but also use that discussion to enrich it so that it doesn't become a statue that we go and genuflect in front of it now and again to prove that we are members of the SACP or cadres of the SACP. It must be enriched as well. Now, at the risk of a caricature of SARS, before I just go into reminding ourselves, by the way, what SARS is saying, is that maybe there are four immediate sources of SARS, why we developed the South African road to socialism, which we adopted at our Congress in 2012. Was it Comrade Sol is good at counting? Was it, what Congress was that? What number?
The 12th Congress, no problem.
The 12th Congress, yes. No, was it not 13th Congress? 12th. Okay, 12th Congress, no problem. You are always right on these things. You're quite good at that. Now, what were the immediate? This is my own argument. It's my own analysis. It's not anyway, when you are launching a political school, it's good also to launch it through debate. Think that one of the things that informed us to gravitate towards developing and adopting a SARS could be traced to the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1989 and the Eastern Bloc countries, because this posed an interesting challenge for us as the South African Communist Party, just like the rest of the communist movement. But for us as the South African Communist Party, the Soviet Union collapses towards the unbanning of the SACP, a hugely popular South African Communist Party at that time, even more so amongst the youth at its unbanning. So we've got this huge popular Communist Party and huge attraction amongst the youth to socialist ideas at the same time as the Soviet Union was collapsing. And we were entering a phase of a negotiated transition ourselves in South Africa. That was the first thing I would argue, that the collapse of the Soviet Union under those conditions was the first of the four immediate sources there where we can trace South African road to socialism. But the second issue was precisely the democratic breakthrough of 1994 that I would argue was the second distinct source that laid the foundation for us to develop South African road to socialism. In what way? One of the things that we're faced with the democratic breakthrough, in fact, even the very characterization of 1994 as a democratic breakthrough was rooted in the fact that, yes, that was an important advance in our struggle, dislodging the apartheid regime from power, but it didn't constitute the victory of the revolution. There were still struggles that way. So it was a breakthrough that was laying a basis. So how then were we to deal with this reality of a victory by the ANC, not by the SACP, providing a huge opportunity to take forward the national democratic revolution, at the same time informed by the dangers of not losing sight of our struggle for socialism. It was that kind of consideration and thinking, I would argue, that led at our 9th Congress in 1995 to adopt our programmatic and strategic perspective of socialism as the future, build it now. That was a direct response to the democratic breakthrough, which now then became the third source, if you like. That strategic perspective, it wasn't a program, became the third source for SARS. Because we said, we need to be struggling for socialism in the here and now, in the wake of the democratic breakthrough, and not postpone socialism to say, let's concentrate on the immediate democratic breakthrough, but the very way of carrying forward the democratic breakthrough required socialist type interventions that we should campaign for. That is why that programmatic perspective was, say, we must struggle for elements of socialism, capacity for socialism, and build a momentum towards socialism. So that was the third source, very deeply interlinked, of South African road to socialism. Of course, there was another fourth source, which I would like to argue that I think informed SARS, was actually a very hostile, an ANC led by a very hostile leadership, which had led our government to adopt neoliberalism in the form of GEAR. But much more seriously, that what we refer to as the 1996 class project in the ANC, embedded in some key players there, were former leaders of the Central Committee of the SACP, who were arguing for the dissolution of the SACP. Right at the first Central Committee after its unbanning in Lusaka, they were the ones who were arguing for the SACP to be dissolved, to say, moving forward, we do not need that. They were defeated, of course, but it's very interesting that a number of them then left the SACP. The most two distinct ones being Comrade Mbeki and Comrade JZ. Zuma was always trying to papata this thing, you know, as to why they left. They did not believe that there was a need. They were believing that it's important now to focus on, but they did not stop there. When then they did not succeed in letting the Communist Party dissolve itself, they actually launched what I would call a liquidationist offensive against the SACP. When I got elected as the General Secretary, it was so tough and difficult, not so much from our class enemy, but from elements within the class project, by the way, who deliberately, some of them, remained in the party, but in order to ensure its dissolution. I was actually quite upset to see some snippets from Comrade Charles Nqabudu, I must say, in his Harry Gwala lecture, you know, and say, but this comrade is not being honest. I don't know what we have to do with this, because the problem we were faced with after 1994 as the SACP was this liquidationist push by the 1996 class project. And Comrade Charles was on the wrong side of the divide. We had to defend the Communist Party from being liquidated. That was one of our biggest battles that also informed SARS, South African Road to Socialism, as our new program, to defend the party, but also to advance. And then we said, we therefore need, and also we had said, by the way, the strategic perspectives of 1995 did not have a program of action, which is what we started adopting at our 10th Congress, and thereafter followed by the beginnings of beginning to think towards SARS, to say, yes, we have a strategic perspective, but what is its program? I don't know what we do, by the way, about Comrade Charles. I don't want us to divert to this. Maybe the officials will need to do this, because we can't allow the name of Comrade Harry Gwala to be used, to tell a wrong story. Yes, we were divided as the party then, but we were divided between those who wanted to build the SACP and those who wanted to liquidate it. That was the problem that we were faced with at the time, in the 90s into the early 2000s. But it's important, therefore, comrades, when we say, when I argue and you accept this argument that SARS, then it's a very important. So a hostile ANC, as I said, was the fourth reason, and the 10 to neoliberalism. Now, it's important that we remind ourselves, then, moving towards ending. I was hoping to spend a bit more time on this, but I don't now. Just to remind ourselves about what SARS says. SARS firstly described itself as a broad Marxist-Leninist framework for the revolutionary work of the SACP. At that time, it said in 2012, over the next 5 years, we want to argue that over the coming period, including the period we are in and beyond, it serves, it says, as an ideological weapon and political education resource for SACP structures and for our broader alliance. That's what SARS says, and correctly so. Something that I think we did not adequately do. Then it goes on to define why the struggle for socialism and gives a detailed analysis of that. And also still talk about colonialism of a special type, not just as a legacy, but in many ways still being reproduced by the kind of society that we are in South Africa. And reaffirming the National Democratic Revolution as our road to socialism. So when we are talking the South African road to socialism, it's the National Democratic Revolution. It's deepening, defending, and advancing the NDR as our direct road, as our South African road to socialism. By the way, this title was also inspired by our 1962 program, which said South African Road to Freedom. But after the democratic breakthrough, we then said we need to begin to map out our own road much more clearer to socialism, which is what SARS was trying to do. That's why it's such an important program. And then it also talks about the SACP and socialism and argues, interestingly there, that socialism is not a ready-made blueprint that can be wheeled out, fully formed. It's a transitional economy in which capitalism is still present, but in which the socialized sector is hegemonic. In other words, socialism still has class struggle in the struggle towards its own consolidation, as we're seeking to build a dominant socialized and state sector. And we had said, by the way, as the SACP, socialism is not some second stage after the completion of the NDR. But as far as we are concerned, advancing, deepening, and defending the NDR will require decisive advance towards socialism, which is then why SARS reaffirms, we said in 1995, socialism is the future, build it now, which is still as important as anything. Then SARS talk about the SACP and state power. The current version needs to be updated. We have not, because it does need to capture the debates that we've been having of late or since then on the issue of state power. But it does say quite clearly that the central question of any revolution, including the South African National Democratic Revolution, is the question of state power. But SARS, interestingly, says part of that struggle for state power must also be about building a strong state to drive a national democratic revolution. And for the NDR to succeed, for the working class to play a hegemonic role. In essence, the heart of the South African road to socialism, it says we need to build working class hegemony in all key sites of power. That is what I think, and the Central Committee has been saying as much, that as we're debating now, much more immediately the question of potential for electoral participation by the SACP, we somehow were de-emphasizing the totality of SARS in terms of building working class hegemony in all key sites of power, not just in the state, important as the state is. And it says, by the way, SARS, that the SACP is a vanguard party of socialism and not a narrowly electoralist formation. Now, in our debates, there were those tendencies as well of veering towards the SACP just reducing it to an electoralist formation and sitting in debate with a kind of SARS-driven approach. I'm not trying to suggest that comrades who were arguing a particular direction, they had left SARS, but we have never really, comrades, taken the discussion of SARS in the kind of detail that we need in our party structures, not for purposes of any one single debate, but as our program. That in fact, to advance through SARS will take us a long way towards doing whatever may need to be done in future, including an independent electoral contestation. Of course, it identifies state power, SARS, as a key site of struggle in which we must build working class hegemony. And not SACP hegemony, but working class hegemony. That's what SARS says. The second area is, not in any order of priority, is the SACP and the economy. The economy is a key site of struggle. In an economy whose major means of accumulation is a capitalist path. We also mention the SACP and the workplace. It's important to remind ourselves about this because sometimes in our discussions we have forgotten that we have said we need to build working class hegemony in all key sites of power, in the workplace, in our communities. The latest elaboration of some of the challenges facing our communities as dealing with the crisis of social reproduction, it's an important theoretical advance, by the way, by the party, which when we update SARS, I hope at our 15th Congress, we should actually elaborate communities, under communities in particular, the issue of the crisis of social reproduction, the problem of gender-based violence that we are actually dealing with, amongst other many things that are actually a program. That SARS say our communities are also the sites of daily collective courage at the same time, not just victims, productive, creative, and solidaristic activities. Then there's the issue of the battle of ideas as another key site of struggle in leadership. We need to build working class hegemony. And a later pillar that we added is the one that I've already spoken about, the SACP and the struggle for environmental sustainability. Now, let me just make a few key points towards concluding. The Jack Simons Political School must use SARS as the very early point of departure in building the cadre that we want. Also, we must continue to study the classics. I'm not arguing that we just study SARS, but the classics will best be studied within the framework or within the prism of the South African road to socialism. What do I mean by that? For instance, if we study the ideological pillar of SARS, we study what is contained in SARS, we enrich it, but then we link it to what Lenin said about ideology, what the German ideology said. We study that within that context. What Lenin, Mao, and Gramsci said about ideology. That's how you introduce classics. Ideally, SARS is perfect for that, by the way. That in analyzing its themes, we are able to introduce classics as part of elaborating our very own program. So on state and state power, we also then study classics within that context of what SARS is actually articulating. I can make examples with all of this in terms of the economy. You know, that's how we introduce comrades also to the basics of capital that Marx and Engels wrote. So we are not saying do away with the classics, but sometimes to study classics in abstract is a problem, and we should never do that actually. We should locate classics within the challenges that are actually facing us. Because if we study them in abstract, you then have this tendency of comrades thinking that by quoting what Lenin said in 1918, then we know what we are to do, which may not be the case, because Lenin might have been addressing a particular problem at a particular time. It's like this Lenin's thing that we like very much, better few, but better. Some comrades do not know that Lenin wasn't talking about the party, that I'm preparing fewer people in the party. He was talking about his frustration in trying to build the new nascent Soviet government in the face of an imperialist offensive through white terror to try and defeat that young Soviet state. He discovered something interesting, that sometimes the comrades that were good carriers or users of AK-47, some of them were not good when it comes to actually operating at certain parts of the state. So you need redeployment of comrades, and also you need comrades who are going to be used in a particular way under new conditions. That's why he was complaining. I would rather have better, few but better, in building the Soviet state that was actually under siege. So it's how also then we make classics to have a context if we refer them to our own contemporary program and struggles at this point in time. Of course, it's important to understand classics for their own historical value. Why did Lenin or Mao, spoke about contradictions? What is it that led to Mao to write his famous essay on contradictions and understand the period in which that arose? Because all those writings have got their own reasons why they actually arose at a particular point in time. So that is what also I would like to say, and that should be the role of the Jack Simons Party School. Way forward, a few points on the way forward to close. As Lenin said, theory without practice is blind, and practice without theory is sterile. As we institutionalize the Jack Simons Party School, so should we intensify the party campaigns. Because, by the way, you produce cadres, you educate cadres, not only just through theoretical education, which is very important, but you also educate cadres through practice. I must admit myself, for instance, just to take myself as an example, in the post-94 period, I knew very little about the financial sector. Virtually nothing, I'm not an economist. I hadn't studied the financial sector, but through that campaign, when I speak today, people think, hey, Nzimande, when you must have spent years studying the financial sector in school or in class. No, I was taught by basic campaigns to fight against the credit bureau to begin to deepen my own understanding of the financial sector. So as we launch the Jack Simons Political School, like Jack Simons, we must be involved in struggle. We must intensify our campaigns, which they've gone down, comrades, if we admit, say, over the past 5 to 10 years, and we need to revitalize those. Also, we must build organizational and administrative capacity dedicated to managing this party school. Because if we don't do that, we'll be doing ourselves a disservice. There must be comrades we must allocate to pay more attention at all levels, from national right up to our district at the very least. And as I've said, let me end where I started. We do not produce party cadres narrowly for the party, but also who must actually conduct mass political education, be in different sides of struggle, and also broadly build working class consciousness. as we well know, that the working class can't do much if it is a class in itself, but it has to be a class for itself. Sorry, comrades, I've gone a little bit beyond the time that I was given, but this is an important occasion. And once more, thank you very much, and all the best to ourselves in building the historic Jack Simons Political School. Thank you very much.